Okay, we're going to start, everyone. Thanks for showing up. So my name is Brian, or Jericho, more people know me as. This talk is about vulnerabilities and vulnerability databases. It's a kind of weird topic because everyone thinks they know what they are, what they do, but it's a little more complicated. So we're going to go through a pretty brief outline, one by one. Actually, so if you don't know me, I tend to speak my mind, as does Alex in the back. Yeah, see you. If anything offends you, tough. I'm up here because another speaker canceled fairly last minute. I got about 17 days warning on this, but I was busy for a week running another conference. So this is the result of 6 days worth of actual work. And for those who have seen my other presentations, they tend to take me 2 to 4 months because of the research I like to do for them. So this one's going to be a little different. As I said, most people know me as Jericho with all the attrition work, but I actually do a lot of stuff on the other side, and I've been doing it a lot longer than attrition, primarily around the open source vulnerability database, which is run by the OSF, Open Security Foundation, 501c3, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm biased, very biased. I've been working on VDBs a long time, very long time. In this talk, I'm going to be mentioning not only the one I work on, but our competitors. And it's not so much, oh, hey, come buy our product. It's just, you make your own decision. Just refuse to use a shitty VDB. You'll want to do that in the long run. So one of the things I like to do is challenge a speaker. Why are you the one speaking? Why are you an expert on this topic? For me, it's not so much an expert. It's just I've been doing it for a long time. The first VDB that I maintained, this is what it looked like. It was a text file. And for those of you from back in the day, you may recognize that this kind of remotely adheres to the old files.bbs format. So not only did I have the vulnerability database that I was maintaining for some friends, but we had the OSAT guide up there. It was a primitive classification system. But again, this was back in '94. How many VDBs out there today still don't have a classification system? It's insane. So, VDBs, did you have to look that up? Hopefully not. Did you have to think about why you care? You rely on them a lot more than you realize as part of your everyday security life. Their accuracy is not just important, but it's critical to you. And if you don't realize that, that's why you should be listening to this talk and hopefully take away something from it. If you do risk management, identifying vulnerabilities and threats, compliance, cryptography, every aspect of our industry is based on vulnerabilities. We have to know what they are, we have to have them cataloged in some way, and we have to have them accessible to us. Skip all that. So, who uses them? Vulnerability scanners, exploit frameworks, firewalls, IDS. What security product doesn't correlate to some kind of vulnerability? Almost all of them do. So, if you use any of these products, you should care. It's a broader term than many people realize. It's any collection of vulnerability information. So a bug tracker is technically a vulnerability database of sorts. However, it's obviously doing stability bugs, crash bugs, feature request or whatever. But if you do the right search, you'll pull back all the vulnerabilities that have been reported via the bug tracker. So it counts. A lot of these VDBs are designed to be limited for a reason. So why do you want to use them? There's a lot of questions you can ask. Some of them will be relevant to your organization. These are the kind of questions that can only be answered by a VDB. And if you ask these same questions to different ones, you get very different answers. And that's kind of disturbing. Vulnerabilities are pretty much factual. There are X amount of vulnerabilities out there at any given time. Why would VDBs give you very different numbers? So since it's the cornerstone of our industry to a degree, or one of the cornerstones, if it's incomplete or inaccurate, what does that mean for us? I mean, you didn't really need to find and detect all those vulnerabilities. 70% was good, right? We don't care about the other 30% anymore. So a brief history. So these are important to our technology, as I said, and modern computer vulnerabilities were disclosed in 1962. There's actually some in our database that go before this for fun, the Enigma, Marconi wireless telegraph, fascinating stuff. But not for everyone. So when did we actually start creating databases of them? Most people recognize a lot of these names. ISS, BIDS, CVE, NIST, the NVD, OSVDB, Secunia, how many people haven't used or at least referenced these? Very few. But when you actually go further back, you see that CertCC has been around a long time. You have incomplete list of Unix vulnerabilities. You actually had the original security products that were vulnerability scanners, and in doing so, they maintained their own vulnerability database of sorts. In their case, it was specialty in the sense that this is something that we can actually check. Packet Storm goes back away, Fjordor's exploit world. And then even before that, hacker groups were maintaining their own. That picture I originally showed, yeah, it was back when I was actually hacking things. My friends and I, we had to have a database so that we could hack into things. There's tons of private VDBs out there. An interesting quote is from Pascal and Eugene, who were considered to be, very respected. They're very smart people, but they came up with this genius quote saying that there are no publicly known cases of database sharing. They said this in '99, and if you go back, it's like, well, wait a minute. There were already cases of vulnerability sharing before, but how about if we go further back? The real history of VDBs. You have the repaired security bugs in Multics. Who's ever used Multics? None of us. Are you pointing to someone? How old are you, sir? Old. So yeah, these machines are basically not around anymore. If you want a real fun history, go to multicians.org. It's all the old Multics guys that got together and said, oh, hey, let's bring up our old history, and they have all their memos and everything. Fun reading. Anyway, well, at least for me, I'm kind of weird like that. Air Force Tiger Team, Matt Bishop's list of Unix holes. So yeah, these go quite a ways back, and yet still today, we are crippled by them. So who are we going to blame today? This is the tip of the iceberg. These are pretty much the bigger players. These are the ones that you'll recognize. There are obviously others, but a lot of them become even more specialty. They're only doing certain types of exploits or certain this, that. There's broad databases and there's specialty databases, which I've mentioned. For example, CVE, some people say, well, that's a vulnerability database. No, it's a dictionary. MITRE is very specific in saying we catalog a certain thing, we provide a very specific service, and they do. It's a specialty database. You have the blended ones, and then you have the private ones that are like, well, we're only tracking stuff that affects us, the products we use. So let's look at the government mess. We have CVE started in September '99, NIST ICAT, that was before NVD. We have US CERT that we mentioned. So CVE founded in '99, DHS started sponsoring in 2003, NVD 2005, US CERT 2003, ICS CERT 2009. We know our government, we love our government. Redundancy, right? It works, but it doesn't really. So how much funding and how much redundancy is there? And the thing that pisses me off is that none of them really excel. None of them are very good, and none of them are really any better than the other. ICS CERT is very specific on SCADA, but CVE and NVD, they use the same data set. CVE collects, passes it over to NVD. NVD does a few little things with it and says, oh, we got our database. So back in 2006 or so, I said, wait a minute, I'm curious, how much of our government money goes to these databases? And found out that CVE only runs for a cool $5 million a year. So think about that number, $5 million a year. And by the end of the presentation, I'm going to bring it back up, and hopefully you're going to be as pissed off as I am at the work that they do. So there we have more showing by the month. And remember, I sent the FOA request in 2006 for the previous years. And a little more breakdown and soups. So these are the fun ones. MITRE ground transportation, $14,000 a year. Professional consulting, $180,000. Travel, $115,000. Why do you have to travel that much to run your VDB? Why? Why does CVE need to? Advocacy. Who doesn't know what CVE is? They can do a good job without all the travel and everything. And remember, this is on our dime. We paid for this. Are we getting our money's worth is where I'm going with that. So, NIST, there's another fun one. I said, well, NIST runs ICAT. That was the Internet Catalog of Attack Threats or something. It originally started run by one guy, and he said, I'm going to do vulnerabilities and exploit tools or whatever. Then at some point he says, oh, I'm going to do just the CVE set. So I was curious. Booz Allen is who they subcontract to generate their CVSS and CPE information, $23 a vuln. And I was curious, the guy that runs the database, how much does he make? $107,000. That's understandable. So I was like, I want more information. So after I pissed off Peter Mell by making him give up his salary, he talked to the FOA officer and said, we'll give him information. And for me to get it would cost $1,950.10 because they said there was so much paperwork they had to copy. And this is one of the common tactics in the FOA world for them to basically cock block my request. So I waited a little more time, and I said, okay, well, I'm going to file it under a different name, someone that I was living with. And so they ended up denying that request, saying, oh, you two are working together. And that's grounds for denial. So I waited more time, and then I refined my request, and they said no. So they just denied it over and over after that. I was basically screwed. So I need to redo it now. It's been so long. US Cert. Filed that January 23rd, 2006. Still waiting. If anyone knows FOA, that's not supposed to happen. And just for fun, when I was digging all this, I was like, hey, wait a minute, I should ask them about that. So I sent off a few emails about some of these requests saying, by the way, 8 years ago, I filed this request. What's the status? We'll see what they say. CERT.org, been around forever. So CERT was originally funded partially by the government, partially by Carnegie Mellon. That puts it into a weird hybrid area where FOA may or may not work. So I use their webpage, send it to the DoD. DoD says no, ask Stratcom. Stratcom says, oh, no, we're going to send it to another division within us. Go back and forth, reply no records, so I simplified the request. And they said, oh, well, now we have to send it off to another Air Force base for some reason. Then Hanscom says, hey, we're not subject to FOA. It's like, well, wait a minute. All I asked was, how much money does the government give CERT? Nothing else. That is definitely under FOA guidelines. I can ask that, and they're supposed to answer it. So they sent off another reply, October 06, and there's the fun part. Still being reviewed by their legal attorney. Yeah. So, why do VDBs suck? All of them do one way or another, including the one I work on. I'll be the first to admit it. So most of them, they're foolish because they think, well, hey, if we help anyone, it's giving our competitors an advantage. We don't want to give any of our proprietary information about these vulnerabilities. And I kind of understand that, but it really doesn't make a lot of sense in the long run. A lot of them, they're complacent. They've got a customer base. They're happy with the money they get. Why improve? No one's asking for it. Part of it, people don't know to ask. They don't know that they can ask. They don't know what they should be asking for. So who plays with who? Back in the day, Steve Christie from CVE and we created this mail list, Vulnerability Information Managers. And the mail list is very small. It is designed specifically for people that manage large amounts of information about vulnerabilities. You won't find any zero-day there or anything. We're discussing previously disclosed. So I was curious, how many of the VDBs have actually participated in the list? And when you look, some of them really don't play well. OSVDB, we're second. Steve Christie is pretty much the only one from CVE that post a lot. So how about unofficially? If I go and mail another vulnerability database and say, hey, you have an error. Hey, what about this? I have a question about that. Who actually talks to the others? Two of them don't. They do not answer the mail. If I want to get a reply from Security Focus's bid, I can't mail them. I have to go to a public source like them, which they monitor, or another mail list, and I have to call them out on that list to get them to respond. It's the only way. It's absurd. Oftentimes I'm trying to correct one of their entries. Last year, they had an entry with an incorrect date. It was, June of 2012, and the date for the entry was October of 2013. So that one damn vulnerability was always number one at the top of their database for the most recent disclosure. They never fixed it. Or it took them a year. Why? And people pay for that shit. So, in a nutshell, VDBs, they assume they know what vulns you're interested in. If I'm one of these VDBs, all of you want the same vuln info. Every single one of you. There are no exceptions. I know because I run the database. That's their mentality. Do you put up with that from any other service provider? No. You want service, you ask for it. If they don't provide it, you go somewhere else. Unfortunately, there's not many options. They assume they know what aspects of the vulnerabilities, what traits about it. Oh, you don't need classification systems. We wouldn't want to do anything that would actually help you on that. And they think they know which vulns aren't worth adding. Oh, no one uses that software. We don't need to catalog that. It doesn't matter if 4 of you do. 4? No one uses it. You 4 people don't count. So finally, they assume that everyone uses a VDB the same way. Oh, they're using it for this specific purpose, end of story. And those assumptions are why they suck. That's why they're not changing and becoming better. They're not evolving. So they're largely on business hours. Last time I checked, vuln disclosures are not. One of the reasons they do this is because BugTrack, the mail list, is run by Security Focus. They moderate that list. When do they moderate it? Monday to Friday. You don't see posts on the weekends that often. Full disclosure is now limited moderation. They don't have a competing interest, but even full disclosure, he's like, well, why am I going to work on the weekends? You know, so you don't always see posts there. But that's the old mentality. That's 15 years ago. Now you have 100 sites out there, ExploitDB, PacketStorm, Leet site, whatever. You have to monitor all those too. And they do work on weekends because they're hobby websites for the most part. Most of them don't do any follow-up. If there's a solution 5 days later, they don't care. They already added to the database. If a customer points it out, maybe they'll update it. They track the disclosed to them date. So if a database finds out a vulnerability today, they add it and they put that as the date. But then if you actually go look at this source, where did the information come from? Maybe from a bug tracker from 6 months ago. Well, why does that matter? 6 months ago may have been a different year. So when we get to vulnerability stats, which we will, we'll see how that can skew things. Most of them don't care about cross-referencing to anything other than CVE. A few of them are really good. ISS X-Force, they'll ref just about anything. OSVDB, we ref anything. We don't care. BID, no. They'll do CVE only. Secunia does CVE, and they will only ref another database if they get the source, or the source of the information is from that database, and they can't find it anywhere else. So it's a weird kind of, you know, clusterfuck of, we want to seem special, we want to be unique butterflies, you have to trust us for this information, we're not going to show you where we got it, because you may go find it yourself and not pay us. One of the big things about VDBs is how we abstract. Excuse me. So the way we catalog a vulnerability. There's a cross-site scripting in Sprague CMS in Daniel.php, right? So if it's a single cross-site scripting, that's one vulnerability entry. Well, what if there's 18 scripts that are affected? There's Daniel.php, Zach.php, Jake.php. How do you catalog those? Are those 18 distinct vulnerabilities? Yes, they are. Does it help your customers if you make 18 entries? Sometimes. Some VDBs say, nope, we're going to lump it. CVE puts them all into one entry. Secunia, one entry. OSVDB, we split it out. Then you find out that CVE can map up to 66 distinct vulnerabilities. That's the most I've seen so far. How many CVEs were there last year? Doesn't matter. Let's say there's 5,000. How many vulnerabilities were there last year? Who knows? You have absolutely no way to count that. Some VDBs change their abstraction over the years. ISS did it. They used to abstract so that they had one entry per vuln. Now there's two. They make an entry for, there's a vulnerability in Microsoft blah, and oh, you're missing a patch for that as a separate entry. So now you can't really count on their overall numbers either. Evolution. Back in 2005, Jake and I presented on VDBs at CanSec West, and our big thing was, hey, they're not evolving. They've been the same for years and years. Why is this happening? Or why isn't anything happening? And we're curious if anything changed. And so these are the slides from that presentation. Where's the information gathered? Same sources. None of these VDBs are looking at additional sources, which we've been crying about for, you know, years. Standardization of definitions. We finally got CVSS. It's adopted by most, but it's got serious flaws. Karsten and I, we wrote a 14-page letter to first.org saying, hey, for CVSS3, can you actually do some stuff that'll make this, you know, useful? Because one of the big things about CVSS is they say, well, if you're going to score this vulnerability, we want it to be repeatable. If you score it and you score it, you should get the same score every time. And that's just not how it is anymore. You know, you have one vulnerability, you have 8 VDBs, you'll have 10 scores easily. Expect more, 20 years since inception, limited improvements, same things. Very few have added any of that. All these things we bitched about in 2005, we basically said, here is a to-do list to make your VDB more useful to your customers. How many actually did it? Very few. By very few, I mean one. So, do you keep buying or using the same software that never changes, never gets any new features? No. People want new features. They want bugs fixed. Yet you keep using the same VDB year after year. Why is that? Makes no sense to me. So, as I mentioned, complacency. What we need to do is we need to snap all the VDBs out of it and say, wait a minute, we demand better. So just for fun, what do we suffer through in doing this? We have it in spades. We go through living hell. We spend hours debating the most pedantic point you will ever imagine. You will call us psychopaths. How far we will argue if this should be capitalized in the title or not. That's just us. We think that the VDB should have standards, and we think that if any of you ask me a question about the VDB, I should be able to give you all the logic and all the reasons that we made that decision, and hopefully afterwards you say, yep, that's the right thing to do. So the challenges we face: unhealthy levels of rage. We walk away from the computers to avoid outburst. The hackers that everyone's talking about, oh, smart hackers, morons, almost all of them. Any of you know who Must Live is? Anybody read Full Disclosure? Anyone? Must Live, yeah? Couple? You like reading his advisories, or would you rather cut your wrist? Yeah. Vulnerability Lab, more recent. Anyone read their advisories? Yeah. How painful are those? They're dismal. You read it and you're like, what are you smoking? I understand there's a language barrier, so ThreatPost has been giving them more articles, and that's why I'm calling them out. If you're with ThreatPost, I know you're probably not, but quit giving them attention. So for Vuln Labs, because they were releasing a lot of advisories, I sent a nice mail to them. I said, hey, I'd like to help you rewrite your advisories, redo your template. I'd like to give you some pointers on making these more readable for your customers, which they supposedly have, and everyone else that you're sharing this information with. No reply. And so then I started getting a little more hostile, trying to, prod the bear. Maybe they'll get angry and say, fine, just do it. No, it didn't work. So the guy that runs Vuln Lab, he despises me. If he was in the room, he'd come up and knife me in a heartbeat. The things I say on Twitter to him, not very friendly. Oh, I started out polite. Yeah. Lately, no, it's the eat a bowl of dicks kind of stuff, yeah. So, packet storm and EDB, what do we see? Oh, we found a vulnerability in this software. What version? Your guess is as good as mine. Do you assume it's the latest version they tested? Wrong assumption. It rarely is. They love to go and find this 8-year-old version that no one is using and test that. Hey, there's a cross-site scripting vulnerability in this. Great, you're a hacker. Okay. Now, who did you actually help in doing that? No one. Who did you give a headache to? Me. Yeah. LFI and traversal, local file inclusion and a directory traversal. Same thing, right? Oh, God, no. Very different vulnerabilities. One gives you some code execution, one gives you access to a file. What do the hackers say? Every one these days. There are no more traversals. They're all LFI, every single one. So we have to figure all these out. So one of the things that OSVDB does is we track what we call myth or fake. And this actually goes back to a conversation in '96 on IRC with a guy, and he's like, there's all these myths back in the '90s of these vulnerabilities. Was it really vulnerable or not? Well, if you searched around, you got conflicting information. Some places added the information, then they removed it. Why? Does it mean it was inaccurate, or did they just say, well, we're not sure, so we'll remove it? So we said, wait a minute, we should actually catalog these and definitively say, this is a bullshit report. Do not rely on this. So now we started doing that, and you'll notice that some of them actually get CVEs. CVE will flag them disputed or sometimes flat out say, this is wrong, but once it's been assigned, there's no reason to yank the assignment. Inaccurate reports. So recently we grabbed Karsten from Secunia. We brought him over to OSVDB and said, help us. He's a smart guy. He's been doing VDB stuff a long time. And he said, well, wait a minute. A lot of the stuff you're tracking, you call it a denial of service, but there's really no crossing of privilege boundaries. I was like, hey, that's a good point. Maybe some limited thing. Well, hey, if you rub your head and, sacrifice a chicken at midnight, I can actually cross that boundary. Doesn't count. So we started flagging not a vulnerability. it's a stability bug, it's a crash, or it's a feature by design. And that's a fun one. We continually get these reports. Oh, well, there's a cross-site scripting vulnerability in the admin component if you're editing a template on a CMS. It's like, yeah, that's how they add Google Ads and other script code to their blog. That's legitimate? No, it's cross-site scripting. So we have to consider these reports and say, wait a minute. That also makes us often have to go read about the products. There's hundreds of thousands out there. We have to know all of them somehow. Vendors, Oracle. We all love Oracle, don't we? So Oracle said, hey, we're going to get all fancy. We're going to do that CVSS thing. So a while back in Java, there was a vulnerability in Gopher. Gopher. Who ever used Gopher? Come on. Awesome. So I was like, this is the best vulnerability disclosure of the year. So I looked at it, and I was like, base score, 0, 0. How is that a vulnerability? 0, 0 means no impact to confidentiality or integrity or availability. If there's no impact to any of them, where's the vulnerability? So all we had at the time was the Oracle report. So NVD says, yep, we're going to score that at 10.0. You'd be surprised. That's actually kind of the logical thing to do. We don't trust Oracle either. CVSS basically says in very uncertain terms that you have to read between the lines to figure out is if you don't know what the vulnerability is, score for the worst. Yep, that's a problem, but we have to do it. So then the advisory came out, the associated one, and it actually gave some details about the vulnerability. It's like, okay, yeah, it's not the biggest concern, but there is an issue here. So we scored it, 5.0. We said there is small impact to the integrity of the system because of this vulnerability. I thought I had the other one up. Anyway, NVD right now scores it as 0, 0 again. Long story short, you can't trust Oracle, you can't trust HP, you can't trust any of these vendors to do CVSS. They haven't read the specs. They're like, hey, there's a calculator online. I can hit some buttons and here's your score. We're good, right? Yeah. That's how they do it, literally. So another fun one, Mozilla. If you get your Firefox update, it fixed multiple unspecified memory corruption bugs. Well, it doesn't give you much more than that. It gives you a single CVE, and then it gives you a list of bugs. And if you go click on them, bugs not found. Why? Because they're locked. So Mozilla releases today, go to the bug reports, they're closed. You can't see them. You can't figure out any details. 2 months from now, 5 months from now, they'll be open. So now it means we have to go revisit them. Not just track what we're doing today, but we have to go revisit these and say, wait a minute, are these different issues? Is there different exploitability vectors? Is one more serious than the other? This is the result of them doing that. Those entries aren't very helpful. All you see is a lot of critical bugs. We know that they're different. Those are all the details you get. But when you actually go dig through these reports, it's a whole different story. And if any of you are brave, take a few beers, find Karsten. Are you in here, Karsten? What an ass. He misses my presentation. Anyway, corner Karsten and ask him about WebKit and wear a cup. So Juniper. Up until recently, Juniper required a login. You had to be a customer to see their advisories because it only affects their customers. They were vague. Platforms affected. Security. Cert security advisory. It's like, I don't think you understand what a platform is, A security advisory is not a platform. So we had to deal with that. What's vulnerable? 9.x. What fixes it? That spew. Why did they version like that? 9.4 R1. Great. 9.3-20090227, which is based on a date, -SR. It makes no sense. So CVE finally, probably others, but convinced them, wait a minute, you have to open up your advisories. Now they're all public. Oh, in doing so, now they gave us a second vulnerability ID for all their past advisories that we have to go add to our database. Yeah. If any of you use Google Kaja, whatever, anyone? Foreign language. I'm somewhat technical. I know a lot of people that are technical. They read this and they're like, what does that mean? It's a completely different language. So, once again, we have to know everything about every product ever done and every version. Or we have to find someone that knows it. It becomes a pain in the ass. So we have HP and ZDI and CVE errors. This is an email where I quote the bit where they basically said, why would you possibly think there's an error in that CVE? I don't know, because it's only got 3 digits where there should be 4? Just little minor things like that? How can a vulnerability, disclosure, and brokering company not understand how CVE works? Why am I the one having to correct them? And if you read up a little more, you'll see that the vendor reported it to them. How does the vendor screw that up? How do they both screw it up? And it filters down to us. So on top of all that, that's not enough pain and abuse for us. We say, wait a minute, how else can we make our lives miserable? I want to track every vulnerability out there. I don't care what it is. If it's a vulnerability and it's valid, I want to track it. That's just, my, I don't know, craziness, OCD, whatever you want to call it. So I said, let's track all the crypto algorithms that have ever been broken. Yep, we got those. How about obscure hardware like medical stuff? No one uses it, right? We don't care about vulnerabilities in that. Go find these entries in any other database. You'll find a couple. Automotive, we don't care if your car just suddenly locks up and the brakes quit working, right? Yeah, we do. We care about that. How about electronic voting machines? Do we care about an election and who wins? Nah. We're the only one that has these two. Why? Why should we assume that no one cares about these vulnerabilities in medical and automotive? Makes no sense. How about the breathalyzer? Yeah, that was a fun paper to read. So the breathalyzer that most cops use has serious vulnerabilities in it. And here's the fun takeaway. The next time they offer to give you one, you have 2 options. You can say, I'll be glad to do it. Can you tell me the model of it? They'll be like, why do you want to know that? Just curious for court. Yeah. Or the other option is you say, I don't trust that thing, do a blood test. And that gives you a few hours to sober up. So, trivial details. A while back, PHP, this function had an integer overflow, right? It's PHP. Everyone uses PHP somewhere, right? So CVE comes out. It's a vulnerability in PHP. Security focus, PHP. CERT, PHP. ISS, PHP. Wait a minute. That's not in PHP. It's in ICU. ICU is a library used about, every product ever. The vulnerability was in that, but it was detected via PHP. So now, if you go look at that CVE or any of those other entries I showed you, what do they still show the vulnerability in? PHP. So if you don't use PHP, you think, hey, I'm fine. In reality, no. You're using 100 other products that are using ICU. So these are the kind of details that are critical to watch for. And this is basically goes into the library problem. So most big software uses third-party code. You can try to figure it out via the third-party license agreements. They're required to distribute with it. Some vendors, Adobe, try to obscure that. They try to hide any mention that, oh, we use this software. They really can't. They can do it a little bit. So what may be a stupid, trivial denial of service in this may manifest as a remote code execution bug elsewhere. So that's why you want to care about a library and you don't want to dismiss a little denial of service. It could be much worse. So if you use Adobe Reader, you're not using just Adobe code. These are the other companies that have contributed code. Not willingly, mind you. Are there vulnerabilities in any of that software? Probably. Does it affect Adobe? Yes, it does. So now, it's not just about tracking vulnerabilities in Adobe. We have to go through all these. And we slowly do. If any of you keep up on disclosures, you'll recognize some of these names, some of the web stuff, tagcloud.swf, and front row must live, and all of his cross-site scripting, and I found 18 more vulnerabilities. No, you found the same one. Tagcloud's used in 80 billion PHP apps. I found 24 more vulnerabilities. No, those are all WordPress themes that use tagcloud. So we have to sort that out. We also have these libraries. You think, hey, tracking OpenSSL, no problem, and it's not. What products use OpenSSL? A metric buttload. I mean, it's stupid how many use it. So we have to try to track all that as well. And so how does this all impact you? An incomplete VDB means the products are also incomplete that rely on them. The patching decisions that you're making, you're not basing it on solid information. Some accurate, some inaccurate, a lot missing, and you're still making these decisions. The more you know about how your VDB operates, their system for import, where they look for vulnerabilities, how they score stuff, what classifications they use, if any, the more that you understand that, the better you have confidence in them. That confidence is what should really factor in to your patching strategy, or however you're using this information. So, inconsistent abstraction, significant gaps in coverage, specific focus, bad analysis, sweeping assumptions, all of those roll into the statistics we rely on. And I just covered that. So yeah, as an example, Secunia has 28 advisories for a single CVE. Can you use Secunia's numbers for a total vulnerability count anymore? No. Did you know that? Probably not. Have people been using their numbers? Yes. There were X vulns in year. That's the #1 metric we get. People want to know how many vulnerabilities were disclosed in 2012. The number I give you 6 months ago is good for that day. Next day, that number's wrong. So for fun this year, I've been tracking how many vulnerabilities in 2012. On the first of every month, I do a query and I count them. Almost 400 more have been found in 2013, but they were disclosed in 2012. So if in 6 months, that number's off by 400, what is it going to mean in 4 or 5 years? If you're trying to do any kind of historical analysis or trending, now all of your numbers are skewed. They're basically worthless. We all love this graphic, correlation and causation. You know, as Internet Explorer use dropped, so did the murder rate. Obviously, Internet Explorer kills people. We laugh because it's funny. But these are the kinds of stats that most VDBs are kicking out to you. These are no different. You just don't quite recognize it because you're not familiar with how they operate and how they generated those stats. And worse, can you reproduce their stats? Sorry, no. Yeah, we showed how much money. So $5 million a year for CVE. And this is something that people should know that very few. CVE has officially said they can't keep up assigning IDs to all disclosures. From this year out, when you look at CVE, they have already acknowledged this is not all the vulnerabilities. We saw vulnerabilities. We saw the disclosures, but we didn't give them an ID. So just for fun, to kind of prove a point, Steve Christie and I, we're good friends. We banter about VDBs. We are collaborating on another presentation coming up. You know, so don't get me wrong, it was friendly heckling of sorts, but I gave him a list of like 250 vulnerabilities from January 2013 that did not have CVEs. And I said, these all need CVEs. What did he say? Yeah, right. So yeah, there's 250 vulnerabilities in January that don't have CVEs. Why? Because they don't have time. They only have $5 million to run that. OSVDB, 10 years, pretty sure we may have crossed like the 70,000 mark. How do we do that and CVE can't? So, one of the big problems, and this kind of ties into the data analysis thing, and if you didn't catch Alex's talk about that, his little segment on big data was brilliant. So, one of the problems is people are all about, oh, we're going to analyze the data set. So CVE goes to NVD. NVD analyzes it. CVSS score, CPE. Then there's CVE details, another hobby run site that says, oh, we're going to extract this and we're going to analyze that. And now there's a new one called vFeed, and they're going to take CVE and they're going to do this and that. Everyone wants to analyze all the information in CVE, but none of them give a shit about making the data set more useful. It's more useful to them because of their analysis, but wait a minute, they're still missing vulnerabilities. That analysis is flawed. Any analysis after also becomes flawed. So Secunia, another one, says, hey, the way we abstract blah, 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 you can use us to count vulnerability stats. No, you can't. I already showed they have 28 IDs for one vulnerability. You can't use them for numbers anymore. And if a VDB gets that wrong, wait a minute. They're supposed to be the experts. We're supposed to be the experts. If we screw up like that, what does that say? How is anyone else in the industry that's relying on us going to figure that out? So the takeaways, the more you learn about your VDB, the better. Is there any wonder bad guys have so much success? Right now, you're trying to patch against 65,000, 70,000 CVE, right? Because your IDS knows to look for them, your vulnerability scanner knows to look for them. Well, how about the rest? Right now, we only have 23,935, and that number's off. That number's already climbing since a few days ago when I wrote these slides. 24,000 vulnerabilities that we know of, no CVE. If you can't patch those 24,000, of course the bad guys are going to win. Of course the data breaches are going to happen. So that number is low. You give me a team of 10 people, we can work 80-hour weeks for 1 year, and I can double that number. I know where to look. I've got a list. I just don't have the time and resources. So what does that say? If in 1 year I can find 50,000 vulnerabilities that no other VDB has, what are your decisions really based off of? Where's your logic in that? It's like, oh, we're going to patch these vulnerabilities because they're the serious ones that we know of. And that becomes the ultimate disclaimer anytime you talk about vulnerabilities that we know of. Why do you know of them? Because of the VDB. Why do they know of them? Because of their procedures. If that procedure is flawed, it's the straw house problem. Just remember, VDBs are not gospel. We make errors, a lot of them. I have about 850 mails from the past 4 years of mailing other VDBs correcting their entries. And we've gotten just as many mails to ours, correcting everything from a typo to a bad CVSS score to duplicate entries to, wow, you just don't know what the fuck you're talking about on this one. It runs the gamut, and we don't. There's just so many vulnerabilities we have to manage that we do our best. So big thanks to all these people. You can read the names later. They kind of contributed to the presentation one way or another, usually by past interaction. And if you have any questions about VDBs, let them fly. I assume that no questions means, holy shit, we're scared. Yeah. Am I getting the, yeah, STFU, woo. Okay, so I'm going to be out in the hall. If anyone has questions, I'll be out there until no one else is around, and I'll answer anything out there. Thank you very much for your time.